Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Industry and Company Data at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be talking about the Kagan Media Summit. And we've got a whole crew of analysts here to talk about it. I want to welcome you all to the podcast.
Thank you, Eric.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Eric. Likewise, excited to be here.
So the summit covers a wide range of not only media, but broadband, telco, a whole range of capabilities that get brought to the stage. Justin, can you give us a little background on really the summit and what you guys were tackling this year?
So from the summit's perspective, this is our second in-person since COVID, and it's really kind of evolved in terms of, the topics that we cover and actually the industry that we cover as well, in terms of kind of the shift in the evolution from linear to streaming video, also looking at kind of the compilation of different assets across the different media companies, how they have created some synergies in certain areas and spun off in other areas. So it was very interesting and very timely with some of the news that was happening during that week.
Yeah, that really was a week in which, if we take a look at both some of the rights that were going on, some of the broadband conversations were happening, interesting timing.
Very much so. Yeah, and actually we had one of the speakers from one of those companies that were in the news with Warner Brothers Discovery. So it was very poignant, but at the same time he couldn't speak too directly in terms of that announcement. So,
especially when something like that is going on, but an interesting place to be at that point in time.
For sure.
So, in looking at the different components, I guess maybe talking a little bit about maybe some of what's happening in the streaming world. Of course, there's no shortage of activity there. What were the kind of things that you were digging into at the summit?
A lot of it with just kind of the consumer trends and shift away from, pay TV or traditional pay TV package like cable and satellite into, kind of a compilation of streaming apps or virtual multi-channel services like YouTube TV and others. So it's really put, kind of I would say an opportunity and maybe a challenge for some of these studios, as well as some of these station group owners and networks to kind of navigate where those consumer trends are, and monetize their content, through different, portals, be it, streaming, be it through an app, or be it, in a traditional pay TV package.
Well, if we think about sort of the dominance and that long-term shift that's been happening, we've talked about cord cutting for ages and ages, but that pendulum seems to swing back and forth in terms of what's available in which environments. We've seen consolidation in the streaming world as well. There's some interesting dynamics that are in play there. That's something that, of course, that you were digging into as well.
Yes, and actually, kind of a renaissance in the broadcast realm because of some of these local rights deals that have happened with sports teams, with the regional sports networks kind of dissolving in certain markets and dropping teams outright. So the local broadcasters have come in. We actually had a pair of broadcasters at our event from Scripps and from Tegna talking about that kind of renaissance in terms of local live sports coming back to broadcast.
And what were you digging into on that front?
Well, specifically, individual teams that have made partnerships with local stations like the Indiana Fever, the WNBA team, the Florida Panthers, which were in the Stanley Cup at that time. So it was very interesting in the sense that, it was topical with some of these rights deals being announced, in the weeks leading to the event, and then kind of, looking at it for the next season in terms of what may happen to the RSN model and how it may evolve with the new ESPN D2C product that's looking to launch this fall.
And if we think about, nothing like the major collapse of a regional sports network to catalyze some activity. We've talked about it on the podcast before. It is interesting to see some of these direct-to-consumer plays where the teams themselves are looking into where that fits. But
Yeah, absolutely.
and is that something, Scott, that you want to dig into?
Sure. Yeah. So, I was fortunate enough to host a panel session at the event that was all sports themed. It was titled Live Sports, a Power Play for TV Networks and Streamers. And so we had three industry experts on the panel to discuss sports broadcasting. I thought that the panel worked pretty well because we had insights from the TV networks with Andrew Golding of Televisa Univision and Mike Perman of the CW network. And then we also had the viewpoint from Pro Sports League as we were joined by Brian Gordon of the National Women's Soccer League. And so, the session was split into a few main topic areas, but we really discussed the importance of live sports on the TV industry today, and then the importance of those media rights deals to the pro sports teams and leagues. Live sports, they account for 95% of the most watched broadcasts on TV annually. And so sports are clearly important to the network owners. And then as a result of that, we've estimated that TV network and streamers spend nearly $30 billion a year on sports media rights deals. So it's a huge space. It's a big industry. It's gaining a lot of attention in terms of people watching sports live, advertising revenues being robust at a time where they're kind of waning in some other categories. And it's a result of just the excitement and, the diehard fans that want to catch all the action.
Well, it's an area where linear and broadcast have dominated for so long, but it's also something that we now see a handful of streamers starting to jump into with some fairly significant commitments. Seth, that's something that you've been looking at in terms of what that shift is in terms of streamers actually now starting to look at live sports and some of their dedicated fan bases.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's nice to cover streaming and also be a sports fan. There's lots of interesting things going on to dig into. But I think at the summit, like Scott mentioned, we had a dedicated kind of sports panel. But also for better or for worse, I think we ended up talking about sports in every other panel as well, even down to kind of the broadband, sort of the pipes of it as far as the consumption side of that and what it means for Amazon to carry Thursday Night Football and, getting into NBA action and things like that. So I think it's interesting. I think too, as much as it seems like things are shifting. And obviously, we can run down the list of Netflix, with NFL games and, all of the sports that are migrating. There's still, the vast majority of sports are still on the linear side, whether that's through broadcast networks or cable nets or RSNs. I think, part of what's interesting to me about the summit each year is, uh, to what Justin mentioned, with all these companies having to navigate. Obviously, the future is streaming. Consumers want to consume that way, but there's still a lot of money to be made on the linear side, So a lot of companies are in the same boat of sort of exiting the linear highway, but still straddling both those worlds and maximizing kind of what they can make in the window they have. Um, you mentioned, we mentioned at the top about news that was breaking, and for people that don't follow this, so directly, the biggest news is sort of Comcast and Warner Brothers Discovery, both moving to kind of spin off their network business, and what that may or may not mean. Uh, Interesting, several different times, both in panels and just talking to clients there. There's still, as easy as it is to be bullish on streaming and bearish on the linear world, there's still a lot of value locked up in kind of the network assets and the linear distribution model. So, I think it'll definitely be interesting to see Summit next year, where we are with kind of these worlds of networks. Are these spinoffs successful? Do private equity firms jump in and take over one of them? Does someone try to sort of super aggregate a lot of networks together? Uh, Definitely a lot of interesting dynamics kind of at play right now.
Well, it seems like the streamers are still clamoring for content, and certainly live sports is a big part of that. But I guess there are a lot of other parts on the streaming side of this that come into play in terms of what they're willing to invest and where they're headed with that much broader content portfolio as well.
And yeah, I think they've been strategic. We sort of had the boom time in on the content side of things where, late 2018, 19, 2020, 2021, everyone's spending, insert your analogy of how everyone is spending on the content side. And then suddenly investors sort of are clamoring for profitability in streaming, not so much scale and subscriber counts, but actual hard dollars, net income. And that really shifted things. So, and even with Amazon, which has been spending the most on sports recently, they've been fairly direct and blunt about, that's not so much new spending on top of what they're spending on content for Prime Video, but more shifting away from entertainment, not doing as many, not trying to compete with as many tentpole originals, with huge budgets, and shifting some of that spend into sports where they feel like that better suited them. Same with Netflix. As big as some of the news is about sports on Netflix, they've been fairly strategic. And for the live sports broadcast, they've also invested in documentaries and kind of shoulder programming for sports, around that to still keep sports fans satisfied, but just to not compete head to head for some of these huge contracts for, the really marquee sports rights.
So is that push towards profitability something that is looking at subscriber retention rather than numbers, or just simply maximizing revenue per subscriber?
That's a good question. I mean, I think at the stage we are now with kind of the major media companies, so Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers Discovery, um, Comcast too as well on the streaming side. They've basically gotten there where their streaming businesses are break even, slightly profitable. Um, I think that was sort of the immediate, let's placate shareholders, investors, and sort of tamp down a revolution that we're not moving fast enough. I think, the next step, the next 2 years, 2, 3 years will be really interesting to see. Will these streaming businesses continue to evolve and grow profits and sort of replace what the linear side was producing 5, 10 years ago? Or are these businesses simply sort of less, potentially less profitable? It's trying to not say anything too bad about businesses our clients are operating in right now, but it may be difficult to recapture that magic when pay TV was so dominant. That was a really, really good business to be in as a media company, as a network owner, as a multi-channel television operator. So, I always try to tamp down expectations a bit where, the streaming revolution may not replace all those dollars one to one. It may be more 75 cents on the dollar that these companies get back in this new world and things like that. So I think that's the next challenge. I think quickly, we're seeing that with companies cracking down on password sharing, giving you the ability to add accounts. Prices keep going up steadily. We're paying more and more for the streaming subscriptions. So, all of that is trying to continue to move that profitability needle to kind of get back to the good old days as far as cash flow and net income.
At least maybe get close to them. Well, and so I guess in the picks and shovels kind of category, connectivity, the broadband piece of that is that the place where more of the focus and more of the good news of the summit was? Curious, Eric, what you were seeing and what you were covering at the summit.
Yes. Well, the panel that I was on was hosted or moderated by our colleague John Fletcher, and the topic was broadband's race to universal coverage. So what we essentially spoke about was, or addressed was, is it going to be fiber? Is it going to be satellite? Is it going to be fixed wireless access that solves the equation for a lot of consumers and makes streaming services and other high bandwidth services more easily delivered to the end user? Um, what's interesting is the Friday. So our panel was the Kagan Summit was on a Tuesday, and the previous Friday, the Trump administration announced revisions to the rules for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Act, which essentially reset everything. It eliminated 3 states from receiving their funding. That they had completed the entire process, which was a long, drawn out, your bureaucratic set of hoops to jump through over a course of many years. In the end, the new rules essentially skewed everything towards the lowest cost option and how quickly those options can, or how quickly any technology can be deployed. And the 3 states that have received their approvals had to start from ground zero. And oh, by the way, all new applications have to be completed in 90 days, which is, a rather quick timeline.
Yeah.
So that said, I think the general consensus between the 4 of us on the panel, including as well as John, the moderator, between the 5 of us, the consensus seemed to be that this is going to favor fixed wireless access in the short term because it is more cost effective to deliver broadband over that technology than to build out a fiber network, which is the most expensive option. But that was essentially the goal of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Act, was to extend fiber more robustly throughout the country. And as fiber is, again, the best option for the long term, but it can be 2 to 10 times more expensive than given alternatives. So in the end, there's going to be a major reset. There may be some operators that just decide not to bid on the BEAD funding, which is $42.5 billion set aside for essentially deploying broadband technology to across the digital divide. So to customers that are either unserved or underserved by existing services. So that's kind of, that was what we addressed.
Well, one of the things about BEAD was, there had been a lot of the questions about qualification, and as you're pointing out, fiber seemed to be the general focus. We did have that. I think a lot of the discussions that were going on around, because originally satellite was excluded from that.
Right.
And the question of whether or not satellite was going to come back into the picture, but especially if cost is going to be a major factor. It seems like while the door may have been reopened, that again, until there are lower cost options, that's probably not going to result in a great move towards satellite connectivity. But I guess we'll have to see where that shakes out.
Well, I was semi-joking with people back in the first quarter of this year that with the new administration, that the BEAD funding, almost all of it was going to go to Starlink because of the relationship, the special relationship of a certain, CEO with the CEO of the country. So, of course, there was a lot of kickback, and people were saying, "Oh, that's not going to happen." But now that relationship is sort of gone by the wayside, I think we will see more of the fixed wireless access deployed. There will be some wins by Starlink, I think, within the BEAD framework. Satellite is certainly an option, as it always has been, for people that are located in extremely rural areas and really have no other option. Also, Starlink recently, I think within the last 2 months, eliminated the initial investment for buyers. Like if you go to Best Buy, and I think you could either pay a fraction or almost nothing for the upfront equipment costs, as long as you sign a contract for service, of course. But I think satellite's going to be an option, and it's not just going to be Starlink. It's going to be Amazon's Kuiper service, which has been kind of in the works, been on the back burner, or in the back room, being created by the mad scientists, or worked on by the mad scientists for a number of months or years now. Supposedly it's coming to market later this year. We will be excited to see what happens there, because that would certainly be a competitive proposition for Starlink and any other satellite player. And just to clarify, these are low Earth orbit satellite services, both Starlink and Amazon's Kuiper, as opposed to the traditional geostationary ones that have been around for really 20 plus years, and then 30 plus years for pay TV services.
Well, in connectivity, you get the Harris nets. All those folks are using geosynchronous.
Right.
Well, and Eutelsat now, outside of the U.S. But Kuiper, we were again talking about this earlier on an earlier episode as well. They got to get satellites up there.
Right.
They did that. They've got that Atlas V launch, but until they can get their United Launch Alliance big heavy boosters up there, they're launching them in dribs and drabs. So it's 27 apiece. I think it's something like this. They need to ramp that up a bit to get there, but we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, their constellations need to be up and running pretty quickly, and then they need a lot of those LEO satellites to provide, I wouldn't say universal coverage, but coverage that's going to blanket a given serving area very effectively.
Yeah, I think their target was somewhere in the 3,000 range, and at this point, Starlink's got 7,000 plus fielded. So,
right.
Yep, still ways to go even to get to 3,000, but we'll have to see where that goes. But interesting to see that evolve as well. So, I'm curious to get all of your takes on what's shaken out after the summit and where you see things headed. And, Justin, what are your principal takeaways and I guess some of the directional thoughts you have in terms of where this is pointed after the summit?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk in the final panel. We talked a little bit about M&A and potential deregulation at the FCC for broadcasters. So there was actually a deal that was announced yesterday with Scripps and Gray TV for a couple of swaps in different markets. But there's been pent up demand in terms of consolidation in that marketplace, and it's really been constricted by the current regulations. So they were looking forward to kind of a movement on the NPRM at the FCC from Brendan Carr about removing some of these regulations in terms of broadcast ownership caps for TV and radio stations. So there is definitely that M&A outlook for the industry. I think there's going to be also some strategic M&A that's going to happen, especially with these spinoffs from these major media companies like Warner Brothers Discovery and Comcast. So, I mean, that's what I'm kind of looking at in terms of the horizon. Also, the advertising marketplace with the economy as it is now, with potential tariffs, looming. What is that impact going to be on the advertising marketplace for these media companies in the next quarter, in the following quarter?
Maybe some potential headwinds in terms of where that fits. We'll go around the table. Seth, what are your thoughts about where things are headed?
I was about to jump in if you didn't call on me. Yeah, I think the advertising headwinds is interesting. Both our panel and several others. Yeah, a lot of media companies are all in on advertising now. Across the board, whether that's sort of on newer, fast platforms or advertising coming to basically every SVOD service, streaming service now. Uh, but the result of that has been some headwinds that we've already seen just from too much inventory, basically. There's suddenly this flood of video advertising inventory that used to be a really scarce commodity when you talk about sort of premium sort of living room experience ads on streaming services. And now suddenly there's a lot of that. So the media companies have kind of been speaking to that the last few quarters, sort of in their earnings calls that, advertising was up, CPMs were down though, and that's sort of on top of economic uncertainties like Justin mentioned. So the reality check of advertising can be great, but suddenly, it can be cyclical. There's just a lot of uncertainties moving from a subscription only model to a hybrid model with advertising. And then again, to riff on Justin with M&A, I mean, we've been saying for years that the media world needs to consolidate. And it keeps not happening, so every year when we do our predictions for the coming year, I feel like I'm wrong, and wrong. But it does seem like the stars are aligning. It does. This could indeed be the year, but again, we're more than halfway through 2025, and we haven't had any major deal. We're still trying to see if the Paramount Skydance deal can close. So uh, seems like that's coming, but we still seem to be waiting for the M&A gold rush on the media side still.
Well, yeah, and we see that across technology as well. And macroeconomic uncertainty, makes people hold back a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Scott, what's your take?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I asked all the panelists when we sat down, what's changed over the year. We had a panelist, Andrew Golding from Television Univision, who had been on the panel the year prior. And really, he came out and said that the biggest change in his world has been all of the data and the reliance on big data from the network's perspective in evaluating which media rights deals to go after. So I think that networks, and a little less so the streamers, but the TV networks are definitely going to become increasingly more selective with which sports media rights deals they choose to renew. We saw this recently with ESPN reevaluating their deal with the MLB and deciding it was too expensive for what they're paying. Last year, Warner Brothers Discovery also kind of balked at the larger price tag for the NBA and ended up losing out on that renewal. So I think that's one of the things we're going to see more going forward. I also, we touched upon it earlier, has been anticipating the launch of the ESPN direct-to-consumer product. If you've seen some reports that come out, a lot of analysts have made this out to be a huge deal. When I asked it on the panel, I think everyone was kind of in agreement that it wasn't going to, spur a ton of additional cord cutting. Given the price point of $30 a month that it's going to be when it launches, and how late we are already into the cord cutting trend, I don't think it's going to be this huge game changer that some other analysts have predicted. So that's another thing I think we should look out for. And then finally, just the continued emergence of new sports leagues, tournaments, events. We've seen a lot of it recently. The Tomorrow's Golf League, the Unrivaled Basketball League, the expansion of the college football playoff. And I think more and more of those things are proven to be profitable and successful, and leagues are going to notice and continue to roll out some more events for fans.
Club World Cup soccer. Come on, you missed a biggie. I mean, when you've got a gold-plated trophy that sits in the Oval Office, I mean, hey, how far wrong can you go?
For sure. Yeah. And I would just add, just in terms of team valuations, we've seen two of the largest team sales in the last month or so, with the Celtics and the LA Lakers selling for multi-billion-dollar values, and private equity is coming in and buying parts of NFL teams and Premier League teams and others. So there is definitely an interest from the investment community to get into these teams, partnerships, as well as, kind of ride the coattails of these, rising distribution fee rights payments.
Hey, when there's revenue, they're chasing it.
Yeah, for sure.
Eric, is there that same upbeat in your area?
I think there's a lot of concern and even wonderment in the networking world about what's going to happen with BEAD. Especially for the states that have already reached their finish line in terms of getting BEAD funding, so they're going to have to start over. But I think since we've been talking about mergers and acquisitions in the last few minutes here. On the vendor side, that's already been done. I mean, we've already kind of come to the end of the road in terms of networking equipment vendors consolidating. But on the operator side, that's where it's going to get really interesting, because in the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot of private equity investment in fiber networks in certain, like literally town by town, like on the Colorado Front Range, for example. You've had a number of essentially startup operators decide, okay, we're going to deploy fiber within Colorado Springs or Louisville or wherever. And T-Mobile has been partnered with one of those, or actually is in some kind of financial relationship with one of those investors. And I think this, the PE guys want to get out after, X amount of years. And with money being a lot less cheap than it was 5 years ago, I think we're going to see an exodus of PE from the fiber world, that is, or from the fiber to the home market, and maybe migration of those investors over to fixed wireless options, um, or just exiting telecom and broadband service altogether and focusing on some other vertical. But yeah, it's going to get real interesting, and I think there's over 1,000 um, service providers in North America, and even 1,000 in the U.S. alone. A lot of them are rather small mom and pop, like tier 3, tier 4s. I don't see them consolidating, but I think in the tier 2, tier 3 space, we will see a fair number of consolidations, M&A activity over the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
A lot of things on the plate out there. I guess we'll have to see where they head. But this has been great. It's a lot of other questions we could dig into, but we are at time for this episode. Thank you all for being on. Appreciate having you back.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Sophie Carr, Faran Mudation, Kira Smith, and Adam Kowalski on the marketing and events teams. I hope you'll join us next time for our next episode, because there is always something next in tech.